Hi, everybody. We're about to get started in the next couple of minutes. We're starting the live stream just a few minutes early to help you have some times to get ready to start joining us for this conversation about compensation in FCS Express. Hello, hello, everybody. We're about to get started in just a couple minutes here. We're going to start at the top of the hour. We're going to have a conversation about compensation. So if you have any questions with compensating in FCS Express, please feel free to get those into that chat box. We have myself, Robin Kamucheka, and my colleague, Holly Boner, are on the line, and we're going to answer those questions and show you some cool things in FCS Express to get that data compensated. Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well. This live stream is about to kick off. Thank goodness it's Friday. We're going to have a great conversation about compensation in FCS Express. I look forward to getting your questions so that we can answer them here live and make sure that you're able to do compensation in FCS Express and get good results from those data files. Just another minute and we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining me today on this live stream. We're here to have a conversation about compensation. So if you have any questions, you have any concerns about your compensation in FCS Express, please feel free to put something in the chat box so that we can address it in real time today and make sure that we can answer those questions and get your compensation squared away. All right, it looks like we have made it to the top of the hour. This is our conversation about compensation in FCS Express. We're going to start with a little bit of a Friday fun day. We're going to say about what happens during flow cytometry. Really, it's all about I'm going with the flow. So today with compensation, we're going to spend a little time and talk about what compensation is, how it can affect your data, and some solutions that FCS Express brings to the table to make sure that you can trust your compensation, you can trust your data, you can trust those results, and be confident that your data is exactly what you expected it to be. So here, we're going to look compensation, so mathematical correction of fluorochrome spilling over into a secondary detector. So if we look at this plot up here with our uncompensated versus compensated, if we look at the uncompensated on the top here, it looks like we have this second peak, and then we have a positive population. Well, if we leave this uncompensated, do we really know? Is this maybe a dim population and a highly expressing population? If it's improperly compensated, we would never really know. So when we have correct compensation, we can clearly define our negative stain from our positive stain. Or if you do have a gradient staining between your negative and positive, you can be sure that you can see that. If we look at this bottom one, we have a good example where there might be some dim expression here somewhere in the middle. We can kind of parse that out. We know we have a defined negative, we know we have a defined positive, then we can see in the middle that there might just be some dim populations there. So what's important about bringing to the compensation table, right? To have a good compensation, we want to make sure that you have a control that's at least as bright as your sample. The backgrounds of the positive and negatives must be matched so that you're treating each sample exactly the same. And then you want to make sure that your compensation floor and clones are actually the same for both your experiment and whatever you're using for your compensation. So now, where does compensation come from, right? We can compensate on the instrument with acquisition, and we can also compensate in FCS Express. So what we're going to start looking at is compensation from the instrument and how we pull a keyword from the metadata, which is stored inside of that data file, and bring in compensation that way. But before we get started, we're going to talk about why does my data look weird? This comes up so often in our support. My data looks weird, what happens, and how do I know if it's compensation related? So if I start looking at these different plots, I have a plot here that's uncompensated data, undercompensated, properly compensated, and then overcompensated. So I say when I look at my uncompensated data, it looks like a crab, and compensation can actually make me rather crabby, right? If I have bad compensation, it's harder to find my populations. I'm not really sure where my positives are. I can, get kind of skewed results. So when I see things that start taking shapes where I see swooping and curving towards this like midline, if I do a diagonal line here, and if I see something swooping towards that midline or away from that midline, then I can start thinking about maybe this is a compensation issue. So Holly, what has been your experience about what you see when you look at your sample and are wondering, like, my data looks weird, what happened here?
Yes, I agree with you. Swooping is definitely for me is kind of like a characteristic potential compensation problem, right? Because it's really hard to see, like on that other page where you had just the histograms, it's hard to tell, right? Whether those are compensation problems or whether those are real populations. And so having dot plots or density plots where you can look at two different parameters. And to me, it always looks like somebody's, standing on the axis and pulling that population either down towards the axis or swooping it up away from the axis where that might be, a comp problem. So it's all about the visual stuff, right? Everybody sees different pictures and different things that sort of cue to them that might be a compensation problem.
Awesome. I have like the same experience. And one of the things that I can use in FCS Express is I can create N by N plots. So we have that as a feature right there in the software. We don't have to go anywhere else to find it. We can grab a plot here, look at our multi-plots, and then use N by N plots compensated. So then we can take an overall view of our compensation and see, is it correct? Is there something going on? And these N by N plots can be a great tool.
Yeah, I found
So now I'm
when
going to move.
I was just going to say
Go ahead.
before this feature was added to the software, when we were in the lab, we would double check all of the different parameter combinations, right, to look to see where we might see compensation problems. And it could be kind of time consuming where you'd have to check. If you had a lot of parameters, you'd have to check them all against each other, things like that. And then having that ability to just insert all those plots all at once, um, and see how the comp is working across all of your parameters is, a huge time saver. So I highly recommend using that feature
Oh,
to check out compensation.
absolutely. That's one thing that I love is increasing the efficiency of analysis, right? If I see a problem, I want to be able to make sure that I understand what's happening or be able to
Yes.
get there really quickly to understand what's happening with my compensation. So
Yep. And
here we're
recognizing that
looking at,
Go ahead.
No, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and recognizing that compensation affects multiple parameters, right? So it's not just often, it's not just the two parameters you're looking at on a dot plot. It could be problems with other parameters, and all of those different changes affect everything that's going on in your data file. So keeping in mind that you need to look at all of the different things to make sure your data is compensated.
Yep, absolutely. And this is a data file actually that Holly had some experience with. So I'm going to ask her, what parameters here did we want to look at for this file?
So I think if you look at CD4 versus CD8, so typically, those two populations should be pretty well separated from each other and not have any kind of overlap. Um, there we go.
Yeah, so if I were to see this file and I didn't have a lot of information about my sample, I might not automatically suspect that this could be related to compensation, right? So I might look at this and be like, oh, okay, so maybe this is, kind of approaching a CD4 positive or something else is going on here. So what would be an indicator here, Holly, that there might be something going on with my compensation?
Well, I think you do kind of have a little bit of that swoop here. And, I would also, again, like I said, compensation affects all of the, can affect all the parameters in your data file. So I might be inclined to add those n by n plots, or at least have another plot on here that's kind of looking at some other parameters to sort of see what else is going on in this tube. Um, and then once you get up there, you can see that we do have some potentially dim populations that could be real or could be not, but I maybe want to, play around with that CD4 versus CD8 compensation there, see if that swoop is a real thing.
Okay. And so one of the ways that we can do that, so if you are compensating from the instrument, like I said, FCS Express will automatically bring it into your workspace. So if we look under compensation here, we're going to see that there's already a compensation matrix, and this is coming right from the acquisition. So this was embedded into the data file, and FCS Express will load that for you automatically. And here we can see that we have a compensation matrix already. So if we were about to make some changes here, one of the quickest ways is to kind of right click on this plot, compensation, grab that compensation for this file, and then we can use either the slider bars, the up and down arrows, or we could actually just insert numbers here. Um, and we can look at how, when we make changes, how this is changing in real time. So that as we're making these adjustments, you can see how it's affecting our data. Now, it's important to realize here that we definitely recommend that you have proper controls. But sometimes we realize that from an experiment, like something just comes up and changes a little bit. And so you need to make those finite little adjustments. So this is one way that we could do that. Now, when we're reading that compensation from a data file, though, after we make that change, we need to make sure that we go back into that compensation window and take this compensation matrix and move it into this created manual folder. You'll see after we made that change, we have this little red identifier says, okay, something has changed. So we're going to copy this and we're going to put it in the created manually folder here. Then when I look, oops, it looks like I had already accidentally added one. I go ahead and delete that out. We have that new compensation matrix, and then we have that changed value. Now, FCS Express doesn't automatically apply this. We have to take one more step and then manually set this as a default. Now, as we move through FCS Express and we move through our different data files, if I had more data files in this data set, it would apply this to all of my samples as long as I had properly set how I told FCS Express to use compensation. So we're going to take a moment to look at that. There are two settings in FCS Express. One is a global setting. That means for any new layout, I'm telling FCS Express how I want to use compensation. So we have many different options. You'll see here by default, my compensation on mixing is default is first, then FCS file. We do have the ability to apply no compensation by selecting none. Compensation on mixing default only. So only if I create something in FCS Express and set it to default, it will use that. FCS file, which would be exclusively from what you did on acquisition. And then we prioritize those. We can use FCS file, then compensation on mixing, meaning it would take what was done at acquisition, and then if that wasn't there, then use something from FCS Express, or vice versa. Use what was created in FCS Express first, and if that's not there, then use something from the FCS file itself. Now, I did say that we have two settings. So not only can we do that globally, so for every new layout created, I would see that setting, but also we can do this individually. So if you were working in a layout and it needed some specific and kind of special handling of your compensation, you'll see that you have those options available here as well. So you can check different options here, none, compensation unmixing default, FCS file, then compensation unmixing default, or vice versa the other way around.
Yeah, so this is important to remember, and Robin and I talked about this earlier today, that if you've created a layout previously and you're opening a new template and you're kind of changing the way you're looking at compensation, it can be important to go into that, which she just showed, going into the info and looking at the layout. Otherwise, you'll think you're going crazy like I did earlier today. So if you think things aren't working, check both options and make sure that you've got your settings correct.
Yep. And then just another thing to consider. So we did change compensation on this one plot, and it did look to kind of rectify the population that we were seeing that was a little maybe higher up. But compensation is not just individual parameter, individual parameter. Everything affects everything else, right? So maybe I can have a compensation issue that's on a totally different parameter, but if I correct it there, it can correct it for, maybe one of these parameters. So whenever you're looking at something, you want to look at your data to make sure you're looking across the board and make sure that that compensation issue isn't coming from a different place. So we've seen that sometimes, well, maybe something over here needs to be changed a little bit, and that would actually have corrected this in the data file itself. So just kind of be vigilant and of course use sparingly. We always want to make sure that we have proper controls for our experiment. But if you do need to use these tools, they are here for you in FCS Express, and you will be able to implement them really easily and quickly, and make sure that you can confirm also, right, when I do my n by n plots, I can confirm like, okay, yeah, I don't see any major swooping, and I also didn't gate this population down. So why does that become important? We all know that dead cells like to soak up everything, and they can kind of throw some of these compensation plots off. So you want to make sure that you're looking at your populations of interest and not just kind of all the cells, because there can always be a little bit of noise or debris. So you also want to make sure that we're looking at the right populations. If you did see something else going on with your compensation, just like we were doing before, we could right click on a plot. I'm actually going to maximize this first so you can see it, because I know things can get really tiny. If you did see something else, you can always right click on a different plot, select that same compensation, and then start making other adjustments if there was a compensation issue. All right. So that's kind of some of the ways that we can work with compensation coming off of the instrument. Now let's talk about building compensation fresh in FCS Express. So Holly, what is your preferred way of creating compensation in FCS Express?
So I always like to do it in a separate layout. So if I know I'm going to do compensation and I'm going to want to apply it to a data set or a new layout, particularly if I'm building a template that I'm going to use over and over again, I like to just create the compensation, like open a brand new layout, just like you have here, create the compensation, save it and export it, and then open up a whole brand new layout that's going to be my layout for my data analysis. And I think, like you'll see here in a minute, why I think that's a great idea, because then you don't have to worry about the extra pages that's added to your layout for the compensation. It kind of keeps everything separate. And once you calculate that compensation, you can use it in as many layouts as you want going forward. Um, so you certainly don't have to do it that way, but that's kind of how I like to do it. Like kind of like to keep them separate in my workflows.
That's my workflow too. I like to have that separate space because compensation is automatically going to give you extra pages, one for your scatter gates, and then you're going to have a page for each of your floors. We also now make spillover matrices and crossover stain index matrices automatically at the end of compensation. So if you have a bigger compensation set, you can add quite a few pages to a layout. So I like to keep them separate also, because then if something happens in my compensation, it doesn't really affect my layout. I can come back and make a new compensation layout and still have my working template. So here under tools is where you find that compensation and mixing. And then when we don't have it loaded from an instrument, we're able to bring it in ourselves. So we can use this blue plus icon here and add a compensation. And you see it automatically opens up this automatic compensation setup window. What's great, one of the things that we've also newly implemented is that the software does most of the work. I add the data files and then I'm like, okay, software, go. And it does a lot of the work for me. So I'm going to grab my compensation files here. And we do have cells and um, a bead. So you'll get to see also what we do when we have mixed media, right? Because this is important because sometimes a given scatter gate doesn't work for everything. So I'm going to open these files here and we're going to see them load. And like I said, FCS Express does a lot of the work for me. It's already created this scatter plot page and then a page for each of my floors. But I do want to take a moment and look at this step one, because it can be really important to just kind of eyeball and make sure that things are lining up. So first you want to make sure that FCS Express grabbed the right parameter. If it didn't, we have this little drop down. You can grab any of the parameters that came in with this file and adjust it. If it did, great. Now let's talk about this control. So like I said, we have this one PI stained with this on cells, and our compensation negative control is the actual negative control for this PI sample. Now, the other ones are beads, so they have a negative population in here. But when I bring in this unstained as a set with my data, it will automatically apply to everyone. But don't worry, we have a way where you can just click on this little drop-down arrow and use self as negative. So I can update these and they'll be updating in real time. So I'm going to go to that Pacific Blue control so you can see what that looks like. So right now we have this unstained control. As soon as I use this little drop-down menu, self as negative, it pops up into one histogram plot with my unstained and stained within the same thing. So everything I do, even though the software had done all this work for me already, as I make changes, as I update pieces of this is updating in real time. So you don't have to worry about like, is it really compensating my data? I promise you it is, and we'll see a little bit more of that in a moment. Moving back to my scatter page, I can see at the top, it looks pretty good for my bead population, right? But when I look down here, I'm like, oh gosh, it is not even grabbing any of my cells. Well, we have this great feature. It's called a data specific gate. So I can still keep that gate integrity, meaning I'm still using a scatter gate, but I can make it specific for this unstained control by either clicking up here to see that it's got that gray background or holding the shift key on my keyboard when I make changes. Then you can see I can drag this gate around without affecting this gate at the top. So I have a little bit of flexibility to be able to gate on my cells and beads kind of discriminately and use that as I need to. Now I always go through my pages, make sure that my markers look good. If anything gets kind of overextended, I just kind of bring it back a little bit, rein it in, and just make sure that I'm getting my populations stained and unstained marked properly so that I can get a good compensation result. And then when I come here, sometimes what happens is that gate that I made on my scatter control is not yet been applied here. Don't worry about it. If you go to your view tab and use your gate navigator, we can actually expand this scatter gate here, look for our data specific uh, gates here, and then we can pull this out. And it looks like I have a bunch of scatter gates. Clearly, I was practicing a little bit for you guys today. So I can actually pull this data specific gate out, drop it on my plot, and it's going to apply it for me automatically. So I've got a great gate now. It's using the same one as on that control page, and I know that it's going to be solid for my data here. So then I can just move this back to no gate so that I can see all of my populations here. And then I can see my compensation matrix. So one thing I want to watch out for is I want to make sure that I don't have any errors, right? If something pops up here, I want to open this window and make sure I can see like what is happening, make sure I understand why it's happening. If you have any questions, please always reach out to us at support. So reach us at support@denovosoftware.com. We're more than happy to answer these questions and make sure that you get the best compensation for your data set.
And the nice thing about those error boxes is that like it turns bright red, right? The whole box turns red when there's an error. So you'll know immediately if there's something going on. And then it'll usually give you some idea of what the problem is so you can fix it.
Absolutely. And then once we create something, as I'm moving stuff, so this is kind of a smaller movement, it's down at the bottom. And when I move this PI marker here, you can see the numbers are changing in this compensation matrix. So it is really flexible and responsive to whatever you're doing in the software. If you're moving markers, this compensation matrix is updating as you're making these changes. So now I'm going to go back to our just a blank page here and bring in one of my samples. And again, just making sure that I'm not getting debris. Maybe I'm going to do a singlets gate here. I think I might already have some gates established so that I could speed this up a little bit for us today. If I right click, I can always show gates. So I can show that singlet gate I created earlier, and then I can right click and also show those gate text boxes, right? So that's already built for us. It makes it a little easier to kind of maintain and make sure that you're getting things already in the right position and you're not basing your compensation off of that debris. So then here I'm going to just pull out a couple more gates here. I'm going to show this gate as well. Gate 1, and recreate that text box. And then finally, we're going to create a combination of parameters that tend to have a lot of bit of spillover between them. So FTSE and PI channels, they tend to always have a little bit of something going on, right? So here looks like this is our compensation. So this might be our compensation. Oh, nothing's applied yet. So if you look here, it's kind of hard to see what's happening, right? Like where is my positives, what's not positives. You know, pack blue is kind of out there, so we kind of get the default of pack blue not being influenced
Yep.
by a whole lot with what's in the sample. But then
Yep.
if I
And
look
it's
here, I'm
yep,
like, go
it's
ahead,
subtle
Holly.
too, but I was gonna say it's subtle, but you can see that little swoosh going, right? But just where
Yep.
your cursor is. So I always look for those swooshes if I'm checking out compensation.
So the thing that I had forgotten to do is to right click and set that as default. But don't worry, it's never too late. You can go back to that compensation window, set it as default, and then you can use these cool little icons. So this one would be applying compensation to a selected plot, and the second one would apply this compensation to everything. So fortunately, with the way our default is designed, when I do this, you'll see right away my title is updated that compensation has now been applied. And now when I go back to these two parameters, I can see, oh, okay, that makes sense, right? I can see my populations a little bit better. They're better defined. I don't see that swooping manner so much. And then additionally, when I look at this, I have my little secrets of how I look at my compensation. And, you know, I'm hungry most of the time. So I do hamburgers and hot dogs. So if the middle of this top population is falling about the middle of the bottom population, that's my hamburger. And then if something is moving horizontally, then I have my hot dog in the middle of those populations. Now you can get a little bit of spread, and that's okay. You just want to make sure that there's the middle of a population is kind of hanging over the middle of the next population.
Yep. And
And
I
then of
think
course,
trumpets. I think trumpets when I look at compensation. It's compensated appropriately when it trumpets, so it's looking equal, it's spread equally on either side of the median of that bottom population. But hamburgers works good too. It's whatever speaks to you.
exactly. And you know what? Flow cytometry should be fun. I love flow. It's actually something I'm very passionate about. So have fun, you know, whatever works for you. Sometimes, you know, analysis can be hard. Thank goodness for FCS Express. It has made my analysis life so much easier. But then after we create this compensation, we've set it to default. When I walk through my next data files, I'll be able to kind of look and see what has changed, what's happening with my data files, and just look at how that compensation is compensating those data files. Now we're kind of at the end of our live stream time for today, but if you have any questions and you want to get them in there, please put them in the chat box. We're more than happy to answer them live. We want to make sure that this is about you and you're getting the answers that you need for your compensation. You seeing anything in the chat box, Holly?
Oh, nothing yet. Feel free to put some questions in. We've got a few more minutes here.
Yeah, for sure. So we've always try to give a little bit more time. We try to do this as quickly as possible, but we also want you guys to be here and get the most out of this. The recording will be available, but the best time to get those questions answered is now. Maybe you have something that came up with your data. Maybe you've experienced something. We want to make sure that you have the best support, and we turn this into like a user group. So then you guys tell us what you want to see, and we answer those questions live and make sure that we meet your analysis needs, and really you can optimize the use of your FCS Express.
Yep. And compensation doesn't have to be hard, right? I think we've all felt like in the past, and sometimes where we feel like compensation is really complicated and we kind of really don't know how to do it, especially if we're used to doing it at the instrument and then we see problems and we don't know how to fix those things. But it doesn't have to be hard, and the software has quite a few tools to kind of help you walk through that.
Absolutely. And then your greatest asset for FCS Express is reaching out to us. If you do run into something with your compensation, you're not so sure what's happening or why, reach out to us. One of our technical application specialists will give you the support you need, whether it's answering you by email or answering you on a screen share, and you guys walk through the problem together. We want to make sure that you get the most out of your use of FCS Express. Really doesn't help us much if you're in the background like, I'm going to throw my whole computer out the window. We want you to make analysis fun. We want to make it efficient. We also want to make sure that your results are reliable and reproducible.
Yep, and it's such a visual thing, flow cytometry analysis, right? So sometimes just talking it through with somebody. So reaching out to us and being like, hey, there's weird things going on. I don't quite understand what's going on. Sometimes just getting on a screen share with us and walking through your data and seeing what things look like can really help kind of straighten things out. So um, ask us sooner rather than later when you're seeing those weird things. So we're always happy to come look at things.
Absolutely. And then again, if you have any questions, maybe you're not on the live stream, it didn't come up, or you were like, hey, they covered quite a few of my questions, but then you're working in your own analysis and a question comes up later, please connect with us at Denovo Software Support at denovosoftware.com, and we will answer those questions. We'll make sure that we get you taken care of. Also, if you have a topic suggestion like, hey, Robin, this is really hard for me to do in FCS Express, can you break it down? I'm more than happy to do that on a live stream. This is your time, and I want to make the most of it. Thank you so much for your time today. If you haven't yet gotten FCS Express, but you're interested and kind of been checking us out, please go to denovosoftware.com, get yourself a free trial. That's 30 days of a fully functional FCS Express analysis software. You bring in your data, you're able to kind of see how it works, see how it functions, see if it fits you, see if it can help cut down that analysis time, the ability to make templates. Our great support staff will have you analyzing your data in no time. All right, my friends, we have about 3 more minutes. So if you have any questions, you have any concerns about your compensation, or maybe it's something else. If you have a moment and there's something else going on in your analysis, let us know. I'll answer your question live. Make sure that you can get that solved right away.
Yep. And if there's other topics you'd like us to talk about in the future with during Ask an Expert, please feel free. You can email those to us at support@denovosoftware.com, or put them in the chat box. We're always looking for things to talk about and um, are ready to help you with those topics that you're struggling with or you just want to learn more about.
And remember, flow cytometry is actually fun, and we can have fun with it if we're spending less time worrying about our analysis because we're building our templates and we can just bring our data in next time, maybe move some gates. What really happens during flow cytometry? We all just kind of really go with the flow. So I hope you guys enjoyed this topic today of compensation. If you have any of those last minute questions, get them in there. If you have a topic suggestion, please let me know. I'm more than happy to answer those questions and get you the support that you need. All right. I don't know if there's any questions. Holly, have you see anything coming through?
Yep.
All right, last call for questions. If you have them, get them in there. We'll answer questions related to compensation or any other analysis questions that you may have about using FCS Express. So please get those last moment questions in there. If we don't see any questions coming up in the last minute, we're going to go ahead and end our stream, and we'll catch you at support@denovosoftware.com. All right. Bye, everybody. Happy Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. Look forward to
Okay.
working with you.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.